It's time for Pure Performance.
Get your stopwatches ready. It's time for Pure Performance with Andy Grabner and Brian Wilson. Hello, everybody. My name is Brian Wilson. Welcome to Pure Performance. I'm going to be serious today because our co-host, Andreas Grabner, and yes, I'm calling him Andreas, said we usually start the show with bad jokes, and I was offended. So, hi, Andy.
Hi, Brian. Well, don't feel offended. Actually, it is. I think sometimes we start the show with bad jokes that shouldn't even be considered jokes. That's why it's really so bad. I don't know.
Well, see, Fozzie Bear from The Muppet Show is one of my favorite comedians.
Yeah.
And if you're familiar with him, which you probably aren't, but he's just notoriously horrible. Anyhow, so there's our bad joke introduction. All right, awesome. We got that out of the way. What do we have? What are we talking about today, Andy? And who's our guest?
Yeah, so today I'm very intrigued with this, and the reason why we have this person on board is because his name is Erik, and he's going to present at our upcoming Perform conference, and the title is Building a Zero Dashboard NOC and SRE Team. And I thought this was pretty cool because I believe that's kind of where the industry is heading. But I believe a lot of people in our industry are still focused so much on building great big dashboards that they can be proud of by putting them on a big walled monitor. And I think it's just interesting to hear from Erik kind of his journey at his current employer and kind of how that transition went. And without further ado, I want to see, first of all, Erik, are you still there with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Perfect. So, Erik, would you, first of all, maybe introduce yourself, who you are, a little bit of background, and then let's jump into the situation that I think the story that you're going to tell as well next end of January. But let's start with the introduction.
This sounds kind of like a unicorn story, though. But I'm fascinated to hear it, right? Because the zero. Yeah. Yes, Erik, please. I definitely want to hear this one.
Sure, yeah. So my name's Erik. I'm the director of the Network Operations Center at a company called Beachbody, who you may know for all of our health and fitness products, such as the very famous P90X workout routines that everyone loves to hate. So I've been at Beachbody for about a year and a half now. Previous to that, I've spent countless years working in support organizations for web hosting companies and CDN providers and things like that. So this is actually my first corporate gig. So it's been an interesting journey for me. Pretty excited to talk to you guys and looking forward to talking a little bit about what we're doing over at Beachbody.
Yeah, in the last 1.5 years, so since you've been with the company, have you transformed your body as well? I
used to work at Weight Watchers, and everyone in the IT department was not participating in Weight Watchers. So,
that's a pretty common thing. The technology department at Beachbody is probably the least fit department in the company.
So, but Erik, I remember when we did, we had some calls to figure out what is the story going to be that you're telling at Perform. And we went back to when you at the point when you got hired, and kind of when you walked into the existing status quo situation. And maybe you want to bring us back to that point and what your vision was, and then we just take it from there, because I believe it's a fantastic idea that you have, and let us, kind of tell us where you are in that transformation story and what your end goal is.
Yeah, sure, definitely. So I was brought on board at Beachbody. It's actually kind of interesting. I was hired because my current title at my previous employer had the word NOC in it, but I've honestly never worked in a NOC before in my life, which is kind of interesting. So, like I mentioned, my past experience is mostly in support organizations, so in call centers for the most part, delivering end user support to customers. So basically, I'm used to problems coming to me and solving them. So for me, the concept of putting dashboards on the screen is pretty foreign to me. But it sounded like a really cool opportunity. Beachbody is a great company, so I was looking forward to the opportunity. So on my first day of work, I came in and checked out the NOC. We had a little NOC there in the office, and there were TVs all over the wall. There was this is an office the size of a single desk type office, but there's two guys sitting in there. There's 6 massive TVs hanging on the wall, and there's all kinds of stuff on the walls. And I look at our main monitoring tool, and it's completely red. And I instantly panicked, like, what's going on? Oh, my God. And I started like, whoa, did I walk into a mess here this morning? And the two guys that are working in the NOC were very calm and collected and relaxed. And they said, oh, no, it's no big deal. We don't really look at those. And I think there's a lot of that kind of goes on in the NOC world, where it's we get ourselves in the habit of building dashboards and putting things on screens just to fill up the real estate. We don't really understand what it is we're trying to accomplish. So what we've kind of tried to do is take a step back from that and think about, well, what is it that we really need to know? And it boils down to one thing, and that one thing is there anything broken? And that's really all we need to know. We don't really need to see green things on the wall to make us feel better, right? So we don't really have anything to gain from that, and all we're doing is wasting electricity and hurting our eyes with all the light. So what we've tried to do is we've tried to think of ways that we can tool our monitoring so that it bubbles up issues to us, rather than having to go look and hunt for issues. There's one thing that computers are really, really good at, and that's taking lots of data and telling you when something in that data is not normal. Humans are really bad at that. We're really, really bad at making comparisons of lots of data. So getting away from that mindset of looking at things on a dashboard, looking for something that's not quite right, it really makes a lot of sense. But it's a difficult cultural shift. And that's something that we're kind of working on at Beachbody. We've, when I first came on board, the plan for the NOC was to build it out, to hire more people, bring some more people in-house, create a 24/7 staff, and that's something that I've pushed back against, and it took a lot of convincing to get people to the point where they thought the same thing. There was, I remember a question was asked to me, which was, if you don't have people watching screens, how do you know if something is broken? And I thought about that question for a little bit, and I responded with another question, and that was, if you have people watching screens, but your monitoring is not good, how do you know if something is broken? And that's really the shift in mindset that I think we're trying to do. But we've managed to overcome that kind of hurdle and sell it internally, and it's just a matter of doing the implementation. So you asked kind of where we are in the process. I'd say we're about halfway through our journey. We've done a lot of tooling. We've built the first kind of steps of automation. Once your monitoring is reliable, you can start to automatically fix things, which is the super cool thing about having great monitoring. Instead of having people watching and reacting to things, you're actually just reacting to the data that you have, also in code. So we're kind of making a transition from hiring NOC technicians to hiring site reliability engineers. So instead of having people that look for things that are broken and call other people to fix them, we're having individuals look for things that break and write software to automatically react to those problems.
Wow.
Well, that's pretty cool. Wow. I mean, I think I wanna just digest what you just all said, because
Sure.
I think there's a lot of cool stuff in here, and a lot of things that are actually we need to bring to the attention of people. So first of all, what I like a lot and what I see a lot as well, right? We are used to do things in a certain way, and I think some people actually build their careers around producing something, whether it's nice dashboards, whether it's nice reports. I remember my wife telling me in her previous role that she always had to send that report on a Friday in the afternoon. And if the report wasn't sent, and it was like a 50-page document, then people got upset. And then I said, what is actually happening with this report? And she says she doesn't know. She doesn't care. All she knows, she needs to produce that report. And it's like the same what you said, right? It's great if you have these dashboards and somebody can be very proud of it. But if it's not impacting the bottom line, is knowing actually when something is wrong, then the nicest dashboard, the nicest report doesn't help anybody. And I think that's a great point that you made. And now then I also like some of the quotes that you just said. I mean, what you do without the people, because then nobody can tell you if something is wrong. But yeah, then the side assumption is if you don't have great monitoring, then you just have people that look at bad data and make bad decisions, basically bad human alerting.
Exactly.
The thing that I want to dig a little deeper before you explain how your SRE teams and all work. So you said the only thing that you really care about is if something is broken, right? And do you have like a magic metric that you're looking at? I know, for instance, in e-commerce, it is often, I think Amazon is famous for quoting the Werner Vogels. He said the only metric he really cares about is order rate. So do you have like a magic metric that is the ultimate thing that you are trying to feed monitoring data to, and then looking at this metric and if something is broken? Or do you have a different, like a set of metrics that you now try to come up with, or a set of, I don't know what it is that you're looking at?
Sure. Yeah. So the magic metric for our business is our uptime percentage, which is a pretty common, old school type of metric. But for me, from a NOC standpoint, the only metric that I truly care about is my number of problems. And we use Dynatrace. We've started using that product a few months back, and one of the things that I really enjoy about it, I kind of mentioned that computers are really good at looking through data and telling us when something's not right. With when we made the transition to that offering, we were able to start putting more data into it, right? So rather than traditional monitoring where you're saying, okay, let me look at CPU, let me look at memory, let me look at disk space utilization, let me look at I/O, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You put those pieces of information in, and you have to specifically call out, I want to view this, I want to view this, et cetera. And then not only that, you have to tell the system generally in a traditional monitoring tool, you have to tell it what your thresholds are. So I want if it reaches this percentage of memory utilization, then alert me, et cetera. And the problem with that is that you have to really understand your environment inside and out. That's something that we don't have the luxury of at Beachbody. So we have some growing pains. We're a company that grew extremely rapidly, and with it the technology group grew and the product offerings grew. And when that happens, you don't have nice, uniform, well-designed, well-architected things. You have a bunch of hodgepodge, built in a vacuum kind of solutions that are unique and and that's what we deal with, right? So people that design things are long gone. People that build them, might bolt things onto them, and it's not a well thought out, mature product. And the advantage to using something like a Dynatrace offering is that I can just dump whatever data this application is giving me, whatever data these nodes are giving me, I can just throw it all in there and ask the system to tell me when something is interesting. So I no longer have to figure out what's important to me and look at specific metrics. All that I'm looking for is tell me when something is not right. So the more data that pumps through it, the more that it understands, okay, this is normal operating levels. And when something's not accurate, then we get a problem that bubbles up. We get an alert. It goes into our chat ops tool. The NOC reacts to it, or we have automatic scripts that trigger based on the problems.
Andy, that a lot of that sounds very similar to some of the concepts you and I were discussing, and we were chatting with some of our other guests on monitoring and observability. Based on that article. I'm going to keep probably referencing this article for a long time to come now. Cindy Sridharan, Eric, I'm not sure if you've read it. I'm going to send you the link to it, though.
Sure, yeah.
It's this great article, but it talks about very specifically, as you're mentioning, when you're monitoring in that way you're talking about, you're only monitoring for what you know to monitor. Right? As opposed to just capturing everything and having something else pull it in for you. And one reference I have to just get in there, and Andy, I'll toss it back to you in a second. When you're talking about having the different dashboards and the usefulness of the dashboards, and for anybody listening, go check out, there's a Monty Python sketch called The Hospital Sketch, and it's one of the famous ones because that's where they say, "Bring me the machine that goes ping." Because in the hospital room, and that is so much of like what this is. Like you have all these different things, and they're useless in a lot of ways, right? So anyhow, I just wanted to get those two things in there before the conversation keeps going. Andy, you were going to say something there too.
Yeah, no, I think I wanted to say something that you mentioned about you don't have the luxury of knowing your system that well enough to be able to actually define thresholds. I think that's obviously a true statement, but I think even more so with the new application architectures we are dealing with, I think it doesn't make sense anymore to define alerts based on resource thresholds. I had a session, I was at reInvent 2 weeks ago, and we were there with our booth, and then there's a lot of monitoring companies around, and some are, they're very pretty dashboards. And so what I did is I observed people when they came over from some of the other booths and came to our booth, and then I showed them a Dynatrace dashboard with a lot of charts on it. And then I asked them, so what does this dashboard tell you? Is it good or bad? And then they said, well, it looks strange. I don't know. I think it's bad. And I said, honestly, you have no clue because you didn't build that dashboard. And even if somebody would have built the dashboard and set an alert on something and it goes red, it doesn't mean that it's a bad thing, because just because a CPU goes hot doesn't mean it's a bad thing if it doesn't impact the bottom line. Coming back to what you said, are we up? Can people view our content? Can people sign up for our service? That's in the end what really matters, and especially if we're now building very dynamic environments that scale up and down depending on demand, looking at something like a CPU utilization, memory utilization, or the existence, or let's say the number of instances of a certain component becomes totally, not completely irrelevant, but not as important anymore as it used to be.
Yeah,
right?
I was going to challenge you there, Andy, as well, because if you're thinking about something like caches, right, cache or different kind of cache usages, while you can scale outside, if you're not properly leveraging your cache, then you're going to end up costing yourself more money. So it might not necessarily impact, let's say, that Amazon sales rate, but you run the risk of introducing scaling risk to your system if you're not looking at certain things that might not trigger some sort of automated alert, right? Your lack of use of cache might not trigger an issue until it's way out of control, right? So I think there are, again, it's not black and white, I think, but there are probably use cases where some of those metrics are important to have. But again, if you're just monitoring that cache and you have that number there, it's meaningless if it's not tied to and or analyzed in conjunction with some of these other components, right? Just having that number is what's kind of useless. It has to be actionable.
Exactly. And I think, Erik, to your point, you said, machines are pretty good in ingesting a lot of data and finding anomalies.
Right.
And I believe that's why anomaly detection and automatic baselining is the key point here that, we all try to do. And I mean, that's not only true for Dynatrace, but I think other monitoring vendors as well. But I think that's a key thing.
For sure.
Cool. So thanks for that little excursion. So that means dashboards alone obviously don't cut it anymore, and we want to go to kind of this zero dashboard knock. Now, tell me. So you explained where you came from, how the situation was, and kind of your path. What else did you do? Some lessons learned, or like you mentioned SRE team. What does that mean exactly?
Sure. Yeah. So the SRE team, we currently have a single person doing SRE work. In addition to myself, I'm actually writing software as well. But compared to the size of our NOC, I have a NOC of 2 full-time employees, which probably sounds amazing to people listening that we only have 2 full-time employees for such a large company monitoring all of our applications. But we've managed to do a lot of really hard work in the beginning improving our traditional monitoring, and we still have traditional type monitoring. We still have up-down monitoring. We still have ping monitoring and memory monitoring and CPU monitoring, et cetera. But we just don't look at them, right? We use them as another data point that we feed into our system to understand, okay, I'm seeing this weird thing happening, but I'm also seeing that CPU started spiking. We can make some kind of correlation and identify issues that way. It's like I said, it's more data, more data. So you don't abandon your traditional type monitoring. You just use it as an additional data point on top of seeing what comes out of more automated type monitoring, right? So for us, what the SRE team's goal is to dig through the findings. They do actually create dashboards. They create dashboards not for staring at on a TV, but they do it to get a whole look at a picture of a particular application so that they can see how things are trending. They can dig down into things and they can understand maybe some tuning that can be done. They make recommendations to the delivery teams saying, hey, I think that we have this bottleneck in our code, right? So the machine identifies this particular query has been running increasingly longer amounts of time. So we need to start looking at ways that we can optimize our database, et cetera. So they do some proactive work that way. And then in addition to that, they're building our self-healing tools so that we have things that, for example, if we start to run out of disk space, that there's something that will automatically go through and tar up files or something like that. They build that type of automation. Or if a process fails in a certain way, they build something that will kick off a job to do a rolling restart of the service or something like that. That's their focus.
That's pretty cool. The whole concept of self-healing is I actually have to admit something here, that I had a hard time using the term self-healing for a while because I thought it's something that's futuristic. As I always talked about mitigation, but I think the more and more I hear people like you also talking about self-healing, the more comfortable I am using that term. And it's been also something that we've been promoting. We see some of our users, and exactly as you, using monitoring data to trigger better, more focused self-healing actions. It's basically, just some of the examples that you mentioned: full disk, a process that stalls, some other things like scaling up, scaling down, turning on an additional cache layer, or turning something off. These are all things, thanks to I believe better monitoring. It allows us to actually do much smarter auto remediation, which then kind of looks like the system is actually healing itself. So I believe that's actually a cool thing.
Sure.
And yeah. Andy, to bring up the topic you've been bringing up a lot, talking about our own transformation in these realms, and Erik, you're talking about how you are all still in the process of making these things. One of our, and you know the story much better than I do, Andy, but I believe one of our initial forays into this realm was to take all of our knock run books and let's say we just automated them, because it was basically a script. So we know when, again, based on the traditional monitoring, when certain conditions are met, there's an action that gets taken manually, and part of that initial process could very easily be just taking. And did you have anything like that where you, with the existing knock, did you go through that process of just automating all those?
Yeah, for sure. I would like to say that we're finished with that process, but it's still a work in progress. But there is some automation that's been put into play. Some of it still has human checks in place.
Yeah.
So there's still some confidence building that needs to exist, that our data that comes out of our monitoring tools is accurate and is actually identifying a real problem. Mm-hmm. And once that confidence is built with the teams, then we can build that glue that kind of, when this happens, automatically run this automated script. But the first step is to automate it so that that you can just hit a button rather than having to manually log into things and restart when you're playing, as I like to call, playing whack-a-mole with things that are broken.
So you said the SRE team, is that part of your operations team? Is this a separate team that you manage? How is that organized? That's interesting for me to know.
Sure. Yeah. So there's not a whole lot of crazy formal structure when you only have 3 employees. But technically, I do run 2 individual teams. So there's the NOC and then there's the SRE team. But they're all reporting into me. We all go to the same, daily stand up. We all go. We all have a weekly all call with all the NOC technicians and the SRE, and then we actually roll up. Our NOC rolls up into the DevOps organization. It does not roll up into a traditional, infrastructure ops organization.
Mm-hmm. So that means when you talk about the DevOps organization, that means you are part of it's all the engineering organization. That means you have your daily stand-ups, I assume, well, within your team, but how often do you meet with the actual the application teams and development teams?
Sure. So that's kind of on it's on an as-needed basis. Our DevOps organization is actually it's in its infancy. So we are still considered to be ops. So our DevOps came from ops rather than from dev. But we have started adding DevOps resources to Scrum teams on the development staff, so they will join the individual stand-ups for those particular products. So we look at the products that need the most help, and we inject a resource into those products, and then once we've managed to make improvements, then we move on to the next product.
That's pretty cool. Hey, I know you kind of explained obviously what happened in the last year and a half, and that there's still ways to go. But coming back to some of the resistance, I think you mentioned first big point is to prove out that the monitoring that you actually have in place is valuable, that it gives the right data. What else is there? I could imagine if you come in, when you came in a year and a half ago and they were telling you, well, we want to hire these people, and you said no, wasn't there even more fear of, are we going to lose our, are some people going to lose a job? Or what were the other kind of pushbacks that you had to overcome?
Sure. Yeah. I think one thing that I've been gifted with is the ability to kind of paint a picture of a happier place. I don't know how I'm able to do that, but somehow I'm able to do that. So I think having that skill has been extremely useful for me. And I'm a firm believer in rather than saying, hey, this is what we're going to do, you need to explain to people, hey, this is where we're trying to head. And then let them be part of the process to get us there, right? So I think of this analogy of, you see those old movies where there's this giant ship and there's a bunch of people in the belly of the ship that are rowing all together, right? And there's no windows anywhere, and they're just all getting yelled at, hey, row, row, row. And I prefer a method of instead, putting some beautiful windows and pointing at a nice, beautiful island with some great surfing breaks out offshore and saying, hey, guys, let's go over there. It looks pretty awesome. And I think that the boat would get there a lot faster if you do it that way. So I believe in that approach of selling a vision rather than just dictating to people how things are going to work. And I think that's really, really, really important. And then I think the other thing that's super important when you're making a transition like this is that you need to make sure that you ease into the process. I hate to use the way too often overused terms of crawl, walk, run. But that is super, super important. If you're going to do any tooling changes, you have to make sure that the new tool still gives the same data that people are used to seeing, right? So it still has to have dashboards. You still have to put something up on a TV. And then it's just a matter of saying, once you get all of your data in there and people are using a new tool, then you can start to show them some of the data that they're getting that's in addition to their other things and start to wean them off of that old school kind of mentality.
And you know what I really like about that analogy you use with the ship, obviously, you're giving people the opportunity to see where you're going and then figure out how can I be part of that, right? So when you talk about like, hey, there's some great surf breaks, right? Someone down there rowing can be like, well, what am I going to do when I get there, right? Hey, I can learn surfing. Right. And there's that whole leveling up instead of someone being driven out because I only do things this way and this is all I know. And now someone's trying to switch it on me and I don't get it and I'm not being trained. That approach opens it up more to saying, I see where you want to go. and I can find these 3 interesting things that I'd be very happy to learn and figure out in order to help be part of the team that gets us there. Right? It's just a great way you did that, I think.
Yeah, agreed.
I like that too. And by the way, Erik, I think we should find a way how to kind of draw that picture of the boat, and then like the old and the new way, and put it in your presentation. I think that's a great analogy, and I'm sure we can visualize this in a nice way.
Yeah, sure. It's great advice.
Yeah. Now I have a couple of more questions. So I know that you guys obviously have your quote unquote traditional business that Beachbody has been around for a while. And now you're moving into this, I think it's called Beachbody on Demand, where you're doing a lot of stuff, move the architecture into the cloud. Is this correct?
Yes, yeah, that's definitely one of the large offerings that we're moving into the cloud, as well as some other things that are in the works too.
Could you give us just a little overview of what that kind of environment looks like, the new stack, and also if that changes anything on the monitoring approach, or if you were actually able to say, well, we have this new kind of platform that we're building out, and instead of having a lot of legacy, we can build something completely new in certain areas like monitoring and dashboarding, because we can kind of start from scratch. Is something like that? You can kind of fill us in a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So that was that product used to be in-house hosted on VMware virtual machines, and it was all monitored via very traditional up-down CPU, memory, disk space type monitoring. So there was a project that happened earlier this year to move it to the cloud, and instead of just moving it to the cloud, it was actually built from the ground up and launched as a new offering that we then cut over to from the on-premise version into the Amazon Web Services hosted version of it. So what that system kind of looks like now is very different than what it did before. It's very microservice oriented. So the front end is a single page web application that then makes calls for authentication. It actually makes calls for authentication to on-premise gear, and then it makes calls for content. It makes calls for entitlements and things like this, and builds the page based on data that's returned from microservices. Databases sit in RDS in AWS, so it is a very different kind of architecture from what it was previously. So this does create some kind of interesting monitoring challenges. We have unfortunately yet to get that solution into Dynatrace. It's in the works, and we're working on that. It does pose kind of some interesting things for us. For one thing, it is a streaming service. It utilizes a lot of third-party solutions, and then in addition to that, we also have clients that most people are not used to seeing in their monitoring tools, such as Roku devices and Apple TVs and Amazon Fire Sticks and things like that. So because of that, we definitely have some interesting challenges. We're looking at building out Dynatrace so that we can get everything set up, but that's a journey for us that we're working through. In the meantime, our monitoring has kind of transitioned into more of an API endpoint type monitoring. So we're doing things that are slightly more intelligent than traditional monitoring, and those things include, hitting endpoints that make up the back end of the system and analyzing JSON packets and responding based on the error codes that we return and things like that. So that is definitely a step in the right direction. And for anyone who's looking at transitioning from a more traditional up-down type monitoring and trying to get into a more modern type monitoring that gives them more insights, certainly exposing health check data through some type of data element, such as a JSON packet, is a really great way to kind of get into that, so that you can start to monitor the data that's returned from those endpoints.
That's pretty cool. Are you going to include that in your presentation maybe as well, that you have it perform? I think that would be very interesting. Some lessons learned, some technical tips and tricks actually. Right?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely a step on the journey of the crawl, walk, run. That's certainly a nice walk step for people to kind of transition into.
Mm-hmm. Cool. All right. Is there anything else that you? I know there's still obviously ways to go until you're fully there, where you are, where you want to be with your vision. Is there anything else you want to tell the audience before we kind of wrap up this episode?
No, I think just some parting words of wisdom is try to avoid the pitfalls of doing what you're doing just because it's the way that you're doing it. Trust me, there is a better way to monitor your infrastructure.
Awesome.
I like that. Brian?
I'd say avoid the temptation to bring in the machine that goes ping.
And get the machine that goes ping.
And Andy, and Andy, would you like to summon the summarator?
Let's do it.
I'll try to summarize all this. This is an excellent story. I believe what I learned is, don't fear that change may disrupt the way you used to work. It is obviously disrupting the way we used to look at dashboards, the way we used to create reports, to bring back my wife's story again. And I'm sure that happened in your organization as well. I think we all need to embrace the change. I think it's great to think about that the stupid, annoying manual tasks that we as humans can do but shouldn't do, like analyzing a lot of data and figuring out if something is wrong. This is something where machines are really good at. So let the machine do what they are really good at, and then let's change the way we help our bottom line, which is making sure our business is up and running, our users are satisfied. Use the data to your advantage, and don't get caught up with something that somebody else, like machines, can do. I think that you guys are doing with the SRE team, making sure to automate as much as possible when it comes to dealing with faulty situations, whether it's cleaning disks, whether it's restarting processes, whether it's reconfiguring routes, whatever it is. And I believe what we all need to understand is that our systems are not getting less complex; they're getting more complex. You guys are moving to the cloud, and that means we have more moving pieces, third-party cloud services that we don't use. That means even more so we need to rely on automation and good monitoring to focus on the stuff that is really important. Again, which is making sure that our systems are up and running all the time, without having to be up all the time 24/7 as humans to look at nice but meaningless dashboards. I think that's what I want to say.
Awesome, Andy. And your bit about letting the machines do what they want to do reminded me of a slide I once had that I think is very appropriate. There was a story, I think it was up in Michigan, where there's a lot of artisanal things going on these days, and there was these artisanal grounds clearing where people would hire goats to come in and let them roam their fields for days and days and days and clear the field. And there was a kind of an uproar from the landscaping community saying, hey, these goats are taking our jobs. Never mind the fact that it might take the goats 30 days to do what the landscaper can do in 5 hours. There was just this fear of our jobs are going to be replaced by goats. And, my reaction to that is, if a goat can do your job, let it do it and go do something better. So same thing with the machines, as we're talking about. If the machines can make sense of the data, if the machines can take the actions, automate it, let the machines do it so that you can spend your time doing something more productive that the machines can't do, such as creating, any of the most of the features and everything else going into that still, at least at this point, has to be created by humans. So let's concentrate on that part of it and let the machines take over what they can.
Completely agree. Cool. Erik, any final words from your side?
Just one last thing I think to add to your summary. One thing that's super important is that as you make this journey, it's really, really important to explain to people where you're trying to get to, rather than just say, hey, we're changing this. That's really important to get buy-in, so that you don't create unnecessary fear and unrest in your organization.
Great point.
Yeah. But yeah, I really appreciate the time, guys. It was a pleasure chatting with you guys.
All right, excellent. If anybody listening would like to see and meet Erik, you'll be at Perform. Perform, we're calling it Perform 2018, right? That's going to be my birthday weekend, Andy. So make sure you bring me a present. You too as well, Erik. I'll be there. It's going to be in Las Vegas at which hotel is that going to be at? The one with the fountains, right?
I think isn't that the Bellagio?
The Bellagio, yes.
Yeah.
End of January. So hopefully we'll see a bunch of you there. Definitely come and meet Erik and check out his talk about all this. I'm sure he'll do much more in depth on a lot of things and with awesome slides, especially now that we know the pressure is on Erik. You're going to hand draw a galley ship with people, chained up and getting whipped while they row, thinking of surfing. Right?
Exactly.
Can't wait to see it. Anyway,
all right.
Anything else?
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
No, thank you.
Thanks so much.
Bye.